Richard Tabler is a prisoner in Texas. If the state of Texas has its way, he'll be dead within the hour. This is Execution Watch. Huntsville, Texas, death penalty capital of the Western world, where prison staff is preparing to put Tabler to death by injecting him with a deliberate drug overdose. During the next hour, KPFT's Execution Watch will air live coverage of the killing in Texas, the state that carries out 1/3 of all U.S. executions. Execution Watch host Marlo Blue, criminal defense attorneys Pat McCann and Merrill Pontier, Huntsville reporter outside the death house Linda Snyder, and featured interview guest Professor Sandra Babcock, director of the Center of Death Penalty Worldwide at Cornell University. The Execution Watch for Richard Tabler begins.
Tonight, the state of Texas ushers Richard Tabler into the death chamber. To our listeners around the world, thank you for joining us on this Thursday, February the 13th, 2025 edition of Execution Watch. I'm Marlo Blue. If you're tuning in for the Progressive Forum on KPFT Houston, they will be back next week in their regularly scheduled 6 o'clock time slot. If you're not familiar with this show, Execution Watch is produced by a dedicated staff of volunteers. We report live each and every time an execution is scheduled in the state of Texas. The live video stream of this show can be found right now on our Execution Watch Facebook page and will be posted on YouTube. We will have expert legal analysis as well as live reports from Huntsville and breaking news regarding any last-minute judicial action. And there will be a featured interview with Cornell professor Sandra Babcock, who co-created the Death Penalty Worldwide database. The offer for a final interview with KPFT's Execution Watch was declined by Mr. Tabler. And so tonight, the state of Texas will execute Richard Tabler. Now age 55, Tabler was convicted and sentenced to death November the 26th, 2004 for the killing of 4 people in Killeen, Texas, Bell County. Joining us first tonight is our reporter stationed outside of the death house in Huntsville, Texas, Linda Snyder. She's an anti-death penalty activist, and she is reporting from outside the death house in Huntsville. Linda, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, how are y'all doing?
Hi. So we spoke a little bit earlier today. Richard was a friend of yours, and in fact, you did see him today. What can you tell us about your friend?
Well, he was in good spirits today. He was ready to go. I mean, he was happy when he walked out of there. He was talking to the guards, laughing. And I have his friend here with me, Mary, who has been visiting him for 15 years.
Family go in.
15 years.
But he was he was very happy today. I've never seen a guy happy like that when it's execution day, for sure.
Well, they say that he is a changed man. Would you say that from the time that he entered prison?
Yes, he was changed very much. He came in angry when he first came in, but he's not angry anymore.
He used to be angry and dangerous to himself and other people.
What do you think
At
changed
this
him,
point,
Mary?
he was a loving, caring person.
What do you think changed him? What made the difference?
Getting ready to go inside the death.
He started believing in Jesus, I guess, or God. You know, he loved the Bible, or what they have a Bible that they have classes with him, and he loves it.
He's been through several journeys, becoming more religious and more in favor of a loving God and responding to a loving God.
They went in.
Mary, how did you get involved with him?
They just went in, Marlo. They just went
you.
in.
So for those of you who may not know what we're talking about, this is the signal that the execution is about to begin. Our reporters are standing right outside of the Walls unit where the death chamber is. You can see it over the shoulder of Miss Linda Snyder over there. that is where this is going to be happening. Mary, how did you get involved with Richard?
That I met through a Quaker Christmas card program. We send cards with personalized greetings, and about a third of the people write back and say they want pen pals.
Now, how does that work now that, of course, they have a different sort of system with the electronic mail?
Basically, we still send them, and now they photocopy it, and they give them the photocopy. Or they show the photocopy on their tablets.
Linda, you can probably verify that it is still okay to send snail mail. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear you.
So,
Mom and
can you describe the
across
scene
the
that you're
street.
looking at right now? Give us an idea of who's out there. Is there a crowd? Are there people?
There is a crowd out here tonight, probably around 30 people, and everybody is solemn. You know, we don't like tonight, but it's what it is. I mean, this is the state of Texas.
When you have
But-
somebody that has changed in such a way, is this what?
So
How
it
do you
appears the
feel?
family or friends.
It's common for people to change. Once they come in, it's like they come in angry because they don't want to be there. But after they started making friends on the row and they're going to these religious classes now. And it's like they're changing. They're really changing.
Really.
We heard
He
that last
definitely
week.
has changed more than most human beings I've known for the same length of time.
Right, he has changed a lot more than some of them.
And I'm talking about in or out of prison.
Yeah.
Loved one tonight.
Mary, would you like to tell us a little something about him? Tell us something personal about Blue.
Blue is his nickname in prison. A year and a half or so ago, a skink, a little lizard, got in his cell and he started raising it. And the prison
That's amazing. I hear it's cold there today. Is it cold where you all are? I hear it's cold in the cells. Right. Hey, Linda, if you could please unmute yourself, we'd appreciate it so we can hear the audio. Again, you're listening to Execution Watch on KPFT 90.1 FM, simulcast on Houston Media Source. We are in the opening stages of an execution that is happening in the state of Texas. This is not an unusual thing. This is the second execution so far this year. The first one was Stephen Nelson. That happened last Wednesday. The state of Texas is back into the business of execution. And we understand that. We've been talking with our reporter, Linda Snyder, and Mary, who is there to stand vigil for this particular situation. And we are now trying to remedy a little bit of a technical difficulty. We'll be right back there. Can you hear us now, Linda?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay. So now that you've described how the thing is, do we know who's standing witness for Mr. Tabler?
some of his legal team and 3 family members.
So his mother, his
Wife and his his wife's not here, okay. His mother and his sister.
And his niece, who is 18.
and they're going inside to watch in the chamber?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We're going to come back to you in just a little while, but please
Okay.
let us know when the witnesses come out, please.
Sure, we'll let you know.
All right, dear. Thank you so very much. So We know that the state of Texas is now beginning the lethal injection, which is going to be ending Richard Tabler's life. There are no more appeals. There's nothing that's going to stop this from happening at this point of time. So let's talk about tonight's case. Tonight, we welcome our very special guests, criminal defense attorneys Meryl Pontier and Pat McCann. Greetings to both of you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start off with you, Pat. Tell us about this case.
21 years ago, Mr. Tabler was arrested and eventually convicted for killing a night manager of the strip club that he worked at outside Fort Hood in Killeen. And the night manager had a friend with him that evening. Apparently, Mr. Tabler and the night manager had exchanged some difficult words and some threats before, and there was testimony that the night manager had once said he could have everyone that Mr. Tabler loved wiped out for $10. Mr. Tabler took offense to this, kidnapped the deceased and his friend one evening, took them out. He had an accomplice with him from the fort, and eventually killed them. He was also never charged, but suspected in the deaths of two of the young women who worked at the club. And eventually he was arrested, confessed, and convicted and sentenced to death by the jury and the judge. And at that point, there began to be issues of his mental health, which became a focus in the appeals. But Mr. Tabler, like some people who have led a difficult life and done a difficult thing that they have to live with and are on death row, at one point became a volunteer, which is the term that we use for someone who wants to waive his appeals. That was actually a fairly intricate series of legal maneuvers and hearings on his competency, and I think Meryl has reviewed that pretty thoroughly, and I would turn that over to her.
Meryl, would you like to chime in?
Yes, sure. So Richard's appeals have been mainly consisted of going back and forth between dropping his appeals and then asking the court to reinstate it. And I did get a procedural overview of what his appeals history looked like. I think Pat mentioned it. He was convicted in 2007. In October 2008, his direct appeal was filed. In November 2008, the first writ application was due, but ultimately was not filed. And his appointed counsel explained that Richard kind of made repeated off and on requests to drop it. He would ask to drop it, then he would ask him to pick it back up and go back and forth. But that he ultimately waived his habeas review. So because nothing was filed, a competency hearing was held, and Richard was found competent to waive that appeal. The court said he made a knowing and voluntary choice to waive his habeas review, so there was no state habeas. In June 2009, the following year, Richard actually filed a request with the court to have that habeas appeal reinstated, so he changed his mind. In September of 2009, the CCA, the Court of Criminal Appeals, denied that request, stating that he made a competent decision in 2008 to waive that habeas appeal. And so in December 2009, his direct appeal was also still ongoing. The CCA confirmed his conviction and death sentence on direct appeal. He had an execution date for February 2010, and his counsel filed a stay of execution with the Fifth Circuit Court, which was granted. They then also filed a petition, a federal habeas petition with the federal district court to stating that he was never competent to waive his appeals, and they asked to go back to state court. The court appointed a doctor to see if Richard was competent and that doctor found him competent to have waived his appeals. However, the federal district court noted that notwithstanding a finding of mental competency, the court didn't determine that his decision to forego his post-conviction remedy may not have been voluntary. And that determination by the court was a result of a phone call that Richard made in 2008 to a state senator, which led to an investigation into a cell phone smuggling operation in prison. And that investigation purportedly resulted in pressure from prison inmates and guards for Richard to volunteer for his execution. That's what I read in the court's opinion. However, the court still rejected his attempts to reinstate the habeas proceeding. Another federal habeas petition was filed in 2011 that was denied in 2012. In 2021, I think another federal habeas petition was denied. And I don't think he filed anything after that. So basically, during his years on death row, and the Texas Observer wrote a good article on that. During all his years on death row, he basically went back and forth between dropping appeals and filing new appeals or asking for appeals to be reinstated. And I don't think anything was filed for this execution.
So I'd like to ask well, of course, when you talked about the senator that the phone call was made to, I would like to mention that that state senator is now our mayor.
Oh, Senator Whitmire, yeah.
Yeah, so
He was apparently very unhappy with that phone call.
Apparently very unhappy. You know, some people become, what do they call them, jailhouse lawyers? Was he actually following his case, do we know? Was there any indication that he was truly interested?
That Mr. Tabler was?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Merrill's explained that he vacillated back and forth between wanting to abandon his appeals and then wanting to reinstate them and seeking help. Look, most of the people on death row are suffering from some diagnosable form of mental illness. And apparently, I think Merrill could speak to this as well, is that he's been diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder, in addition, I think, to ADHD.
Oh, wow.
But it is, if you look at his childhood, he's obviously had a great deal of trauma in his life. All of these things together with, imagine yourself as a rational person and you're stuck in death row. You're in a cage for 23 hours a day. Your humanity is tested at all points, and you may be next to someone who decides that you're his mortal enemy, or you may be next to someone who decides that you're his best pal. You are torn all the time between, if one is sane and one is guilty, the knowledge of what you did. And in this case, this man obviously had a deep religious conversion because of where he was and what he was forced to face. I'm not sure that it's irrational to choose death given some of the conditions he's endured. It was reported that after his phone call to Senator Whitmire, he was singled out for bad treatment by the staff. Now, they believed, and their response by TDCJ's spokesperson was that they moved Mr. Tabler to Death Watch, which is a group of people who are going to be executed, and put him in there because that was safer and for his own safety. I don't know if that's true or partly true, but I do know that he was moved because he bothered a politician. So the difficulty here is that his case illustrates, and I would turn it back to the group, his case illustrates the fact that how we treat the mentally ill on death row is, without meaning to be making a pun, crazy. And how we deal with the dichotomy and the dilemma of the fact that someone who may or may not be competent is choosing to volunteer for death, which in the normal world we would try and prevent as a suicide. Or if we are faced with the conditions of death row, we've never actually grappled with the fact that how we treat those men may push them over the edge. And even people who have good claims of innocence, as one of Merrill's clients did, could be driven to a place where they don't want to live anymore. So I think his case is not illustrative of the fact that they got it wrong in terms of his guilt, but to me it illustrates a great deal of many of the things that are wrong on death row in Texas, and how we make the rules so difficult for the damaged to find any relief or any hope of relief. And I'll turn this back because there's a great deal of experience out there on the screen that I think would probably be willing to talk about that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Not only do we have Merrill, who has worked very closely with people, but Linda is part of the Death Row Angels. And if I could, Linda, if you could just chime in just a tiny bit, because you have worked with so many people. You have visited and corresponded with so many people on death row at this point. What do you feel? Is there anything, is it better? Is it ever going to get better?
I don't know. I hope in my lifetime it will, but I doubt it because I'm too old. But I think that it's getting closer. People are different. They feel differently. Everybody I talk to does not believe in the death penalty. So I don't know. I wish they would take a vote, in Texas. I wish we would go on the ballot and let's just see how people really feel.
Happy to have Pam with us tonight.
I was happy to see Richard today because he was in really good spirits and he was not at all scared. It was amazing. He's a lot different than a lot of the guys. A lot of them are really, really afraid.
Can you tell us what your last words to him were?
Friends.
Do what?
Could you tell us what his last words to you were?
He just said, keep the faith. He said, keep coming, keep visiting. He said, don't give up. And I said, I won't. I said, I don't ever plan on stopping. I mean, I'm going to come till my very last breath because I really love the guys there. And I care about all of them. Everyone that I visit, I really love.
I want to ask one more sort of unrelated thing, but to me it's interesting. Since Tabler did confess to killing those 2 teenage girls who worked at the club, what happens in a case like that where he's indicted but never tried?
It's, in Harris County, we call it the spare pocket. In case something happened on this case,
They'd be there.
They'd be there for later since there's no statute of limitations. It's a terrible and trivializing analogy, but it's like keeping a ball in the spare pocket ready.
Do you by any chance know how the Harris County DA plans on handling capital punishment cases?
We are going to find out this year. There are a couple of death penalty trials with death on the table for the jury scheduled for, I believe, this spring and this summer. There are several new cases where they have not decided yet whether to seek death or not. I believe that Mr. Tier is sincere about trying to walk a difficult line between a fair assessment of when to impose a death penalty and enforcing Texas laws. I think having been a prosecutor for a long time in a career, when he recognizes a lot of the flaws in this system, he has revamped some of the procedures. He has kept some of the procedures that his predecessor put in place, one of which is the Death Penalty Committee in Harris County, which are the senior members of the DA's office that meet and hear from the line prosecutors about whether or not this is a, for lack of a better term, a death-worthy case.
Right.
They actually take a vote. Now, obviously, the final vote would be Mr. Tiers, because he's the one with the responsibility.
Right.
But he kept that in place. He has appointed new people to the homicide squad, which is the specialized division that Kim Ogg put together to consolidate the policies and the methods that they use to decide and try murders and capital murders. So I am hopeful that it will be a very considered, slow, thoughtful, judicious use of the death penalty. I realize for those who are on the abolitionist side, that's not enough, but at the same time, Texas has committed to the death penalty. They are going to seek its enforcement. And in fairness to Mr. Tier and Kim Ogg, who set up that procedure, I was here when there was no such procedure, and the numbers have dwindled enormously since they put that together. I wish, if I were getting a Christmas list together, that they would open up the death penalty committee to members of the public on an appointed basis.
Interesting.
Members of the clergy, lay people. He could handpick them if he wished, or they could volunteer, but to get an outside perspective on
Right.
whether this was the right circumstance to do something. We as lawyers tend to be a little bit insular and forget some of the things that matter to ordinary people. And I think one of those is the fact that while people may be horrified at the crime, I think most people, if they're looking at it objectively, have no desire to take vengeance on those who are not responsible for their actions. Juveniles, the intellectually disabled, the mentally ill. And I think that the public's perspective might be worthwhile to include in that death penalty committee, but that's...
So do we know what the death penalty committee is looking at besides just the legal question? Are they looking at mitigation and
They
the
do.
other aspects?
All the defense teams submit mitigation packages.
Right.
And we give those via the line prosecutor who's going to be handling it. And those are presented to the committee. So they do have our input from that. It is not something we appear before. You know, I think that would be something else, but honestly, I can see why they don't, simply because they want to be able to make a cool-headed decision and not try the case in a committee room.
Right.
But
right.
at the same time, this is Harris County, and Harris County has never abandoned the death penalty. They've used it less over the last decade.
But we're not looking for another return to Johnny Holmes.
I know there are people who long for those good old days. I think that those days were filled with basically cowboy, racist preconceptions that sat there and wound up killing the damaged and the black and the poor and the brown.
Right.
Speaking bluntly.
Yeah, pretty bluntly. Pretty true. Pretty real. Let's bring in our special guest tonight. You are listening to KPFT 90.1 FM. If you were tuning in for the Progressive Forum with Wally and Lillian, well, please check back in next week. They will be on, or you can listen to the repeat of their show on HD2. Joining us tonight is Cornell professor Sandra Babcock. She's a clinical professor, and Sandra Babcock co-created the Death Penalty Worldwide Database in 2011, and then 5 years later launched the Cornell Center on the the death penalty worldwide. The center has gained a reputation for providing comparative legal analysis of the application of the death penalty. Professor Babcock, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us about the death penalty worldwide database and why is it important?
Well, thanks for having me. I have to say, before I answer that question, I am myself a Texas lawyer and started my career doing death penalty defense work in Texas and have witnessed 3 executions in Huntsville. And it is bringing back a lot of unhappy memories for me to hear about the witnesses going in and what's going on right now. So I just want to express my condolences to the family of Mr. Tabler and his legal team and the people who know and love him. So the Cornell Center on the Death Penalty Worldwide it does a lot more than research, although we do a lot of research as well. And it really grew out of the work that I did as a young lawyer in Texas. We realized that there was a global movement to abolish the death penalty, but that nobody was really tracking what countries were doing and how they were moving toward abolition. What were the crimes for which the death penalty was imposed? How many people were on death row around the world? How many executions were there? And there were organizations like Amnesty International that does excellent reporting on the death penalty, but they weren't making their data publicly available in real time. So we began this project, and it started out as just a database that we wanted the public to have access to, and we wanted to have complete transparency on where we were getting our facts so that there would be no quibble with, how we were reporting on, the constitutional provisions that allow the death penalty in Zimbabwe, for example, which happens to be a good example because Zimbabwe just abolished the death penalty. So that was the beginning, and then when we were able to broaden the scope of our work, we began to look especially at some of the issues that weren't really being covered, like the executions of women and gender minorities around the world. And we began to do research and advocacy and also to take on the cases of women who are facing the death penalty both in the United States and in sub-Saharan Africa.
Why is it important to shine a light and share knowledge about the death penalty in other places?
Well, it's particularly important in the United States, I think, because what most people don't realize is the United States is a total outlier when it comes to the death penalty. The United States is the only Western industrialized country that retains the death penalty. It is one of the world's leaders in executions, and the other countries that carry out the most executions are countries like China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, countries that we typically don't see ourselves aligned with when it comes to respect for human rights. The death penalty is considered a violation of human rights in many places around the world, and the trend toward abolition of the death penalty is increasing and unmistakable. So, there are 3 continents that are largely abolitionist, and that's the Americas, apart from the United States, and a few countries in the Caribbean, Europe, of course, and then most of sub-Saharan Africa is actually abolitionist at this point. So we are really lagging behind the rest of the world in realizing that the death penalty is not only a violation of the right to life and the right to be free from torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, but the way that it's carried out also is discriminatory and arbitrary. These are things that other countries have long ago realized, and we are just a lot slower in embracing that reality.
What can we do to help ensure justice for those facing the death penalty?
Well, I think the work that you all are doing now is vital, because if people are executed in darkness, if nobody knows what's happening, executions in Texas used to take place at midnight. I'm sure some of you remember that. And we would go to the prison, and sometimes there were only a few people standing outside. But there was this one person that ended up working with the Texas Resource Center when I was a young lawyer there. He was named Mike Heath. He worked with Amnesty International. He was a volunteer with Amnesty International in Texas. And he would go to every single execution at midnight. And he would show up outside the prison, and he would hold a candle with just a few other people. And sometimes there would be kids having beer parties nearby. I don't know if they still do that. Who were in favor of the death penalty, and he just stood there and bore witness. And bearing witness is the first step in monitoring human rights violations and making sure that countries like the United States and states such as Texas can't just sweep them under the carpet.
Right. Professor, you said that you've witnessed an execution here in Texas, and as horrific as that may have been, I need to ask you, and I'm going to ask Linda and anyone else who has done this, how do you bounce back?
Well, it's really hard. I mean, it's, I've witnessed 3 executions, and I feel like I'm about to cry because I just can't stand seeing the walls unit. And I can't stand the idea of people going in and out of that prison and knowing what they've just seen. It is really, really hard. It's very traumatic. And of course, the greatest trauma is for the family members who are themselves completely innocent and whose lives are often damaged beyond repair by the execution of a loved one. So for me, it is, it's a wound that you have. Because like Linda says, I think it's Linda who's on the
Yes.
call with us. These are people.
Right.
I think for people who don't do this work, they imagine people on death row are less than human.
It's not like TV.
Yeah, and it is just not. They're us. They are us.
Right.
They are no different. Many of them are flawed, like we are flawed, but they are humans and they are part of our community, and we become fond of our clients. We spend a lot of time with them, and it really is tough when we lose them. So, the only way really that I know to get past that is, and I think it's different for anybody that you ask who's been through this, but for me, sometimes you just have to take a little bit of a break afterwards. You have to have a good support network. And then, for me, I was able to keep doing the work, but I had to leave Texas because I have I'm kind of like Thelma and Louise. I just really don't like to set foot in Texas anymore. But at the same time, I want to keep fighting Texas because I think Texas is a major human rights violator and will one day be recognized as such.
Tell us a little bit about your partnership with the Cornell Law School Center and the work that you do.
Well, I teach international human rights. I teach an international clinic. And I work with my students on cases of, right now, primarily women and gender minorities who are facing execution around the country. So we work on a couple of cases in Texas of women in Texas and Oklahoma and other states. And we also have clients who are on death row in other countries. We are also supporting Ugandan lawyers who are fighting against the Anti-Homosexuality Act there, which provides for the death penalty for people engaging in same-sex acts of intimacy, consensual same-sex acts of intimacy, which is inconceivable. And they're very, very courageous lawyers who are fighting that good fight over there. So we try to support them too.
Right. right.
I think this is part of the difficulty in fighting the death penalty is that it takes a toll on those who do have clients that are on death row or face that type of punishment. I think Merrill can certainly talk about the terror of actually defending someone who's innocent.
Right.
And I hope she would weigh in on this if she has a moment and can unmute.
Meryl, please unmute. Give us a little bit of, you have experience with this.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I do only post-conviction work, and I help people, and I do that for free because I find it important work. I help people reopen their case who are innocent, and most of my clients have a capital life sentence, but I have worked with other attorneys on death penalty cases. I don't do those by myself. I don't have, nearly the experience that other attorneys have in death penalty cases, but I have worked on death penalty cases, and for death penalty cases, no matter whether a person is innocent or not, for the attorney, I don't know, for me, it was equally difficult to work on those cases. And what I still find the most difficult about it, and I still go to death row and speak to people who have become my friends over the years, and I no longer work on those cases, but I really value them as a person, and so I still go over there and talk to them. And the most difficult part is always leaving the prison and then knowing that they're still there. But yeah, the innocence part, that really adds something extra to it, especially the person's innocent. Pat may have been referring to Clinton's case. Clinton was a guest on Execution Watch for the time that he was free. He spent 20 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. He was free for 3 years because his conviction got overturned. And then the state did not really care that much about his innocence or who pulled the trigger in that case. Clinton has multiple co-defendants, and so they retried him for capital murder. And I was there for his retrial, which was last October. And yeah, that's so unjust to me because the state literally said, it does not matter who pulled the trigger.
Right.
We're going to retry anyway. And so he got a life sentence under law parties.
Let me go quickly right now to, this is a fascinating conversation. I want to go back, but let's go back to Linda, who is outside of the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas. Linda, do you have something? Unmute for me, baby. Unmute. Linda, unmute. While we work on this particular technical difficulty, while she is able to unmute, I would assume that she is going to be telling us. Let's see. Again, you are here at KPFT 90.1 FM, simulcast over on Houston Media Source, and of course, broadcast live on Facebook. You can find us on the Execution Watch Facebook page. There we go.
Okay, I'm muted.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, the witnesses have come back across, so the execution is finished.
And the institution is over. Thank you, Linda. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know. Can you? I know you're busy, but could you tell our listeners what happens now?
Now they'll go to the church, and this will be the first time his mother will ever be able to touch him. He'll be dead, but he'll be on a gurney, and he'll be laying there with a sheet over him up to his neck. And then they get to hug him. They get to spend only 15 minutes with him, and then they have to leave.
And that happens in the chapel that's basically next door to
In
you.
the chapel, yes. I think it's called Faith Chapel or something here in Huntsville.
Right. Thank you. Go get warm, Linda. Thank Mary.
Okay.
Thank David. Thank Gloria. Thank everyone who is out there for us. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you.
Thank you.
And so ends the life of Mr. Richard Tabler. Rest in peace. Let's continue a little bit onto what is going to be happening in Texas. Of course, the next execution that's going to be here is going to happen in March the 13th, if it does happen, of course. For Mr. David Wood, we will be actually bringing that to you live. But are we looking at an increase in the scheduled executions now?
Certainly for the federal. I'm welcoming the input of the other folks here for their experience. I just,
Always.
having everyone went through Mr. Trump's last death run, and although most of those people were commuted by outgoing President Biden, it is already changing because they are even going to relook decisions that they made not to seek in the last few years and review them again. So if you can imagine the terror of the accused and the lawyers who thought that they had a firm decision not to seek death, to be told that that decision is going to be under review by this administration, I think you can get a sense of how frightening it's going to be. There's going to be a vast uptick in federal death penalty prosecutions, period. And to be candid, the Fifth Circuit has essentially abandoned habeas review of death penalty cases here.
Explain to that in layman's terms.
Well, I can bring in my colleagues, but the Fifth Circuit has decided to take a extremely deferential review of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, or what we call the DEPA, which was signed into law after the Oklahoma City bombing back in the 90s. And it is a restoration of the fact that you get one writ. Now, we fought that, and because the system is so full of factual and legal errors, we've managed to get a number of district federal courts to look at things over the last 20 years since that act was passed. However, the Supreme Court has said that the states, which are the first stop on post-conviction habeas, are owed a deference by the district and the federal circuit courts. And this new Fifth Circuit, mostly appointed by former President Trump during his first administration, have taken extraordinarily tough stance against reviewing state cases. They have acknowledged instances of prosecutorial misconduct and lying, procedural problems, and they have said, we don't care. The states get their shot under the law, and that is Congress's wish. And I have been dealing with this. I believe my colleagues have as well, and I'd be interested in hearing their thoughts on both the Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit essentially abandoning death penalty review.
That's a great question. Let's start with our guest, if you don't mind. Professor, what do you have to say?
I would love, please.
Okay. Does anybody else take an execution?
Professor? Professor Babcock, can you hear us?
I'm having a hard time because there's a lot of noise from the Huntsville microphones. So I'm sorry, what was the question?
Professor, for me, it's been painfully obvious that both the Fifth Circuit, Federal Court of Appeals, has essentially withdrawn from habeas review of the Texas death penalty decisions. And it seems as if the Supreme Court, although they did take one case this past term, it's been an extraordinary step back for them of death penalty review. They have refused cert in so many cases that seem to cry out for it, and I was wondering if you are seeing the same trend.
You know, I don't know if I could say with any certainty, because I also remember them denying a lot of other cases in the past. I think it's always been a really tough road to get any form of relief from the Fifth Circuit. There's a judge on that court, Edith Jones, who is still there after so many years, who is absolutely impervious to any arguments about fair trial violations, discrimination, arbitrariness, prosecutorial misconduct, innocence, you name it. And the Supreme Court, you know, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, it only takes 1% of cases, and I think they've always had a higher standard when it comes to death penalty cases. And, you know, as you point out, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act imposes such insurmountable barriers to federal court review of state court convictions and death sentences that it's like threading a needle. You just can't, you know, it's just a very rare case that manages to get any form of relief in the federal courts. So when it does happen, it feels pretty miraculous. So, you know, I can't say, you know, it's very hard for me to determine whether or not it's worse now than it was before. I would say that the Supreme Court, if you do get a case heard on the merits, it's also not necessarily a good thing, because it might mean that you got a good decision in the court below, and then the Supreme Court is going to take it and overturn it. I will say I won a case in the Supreme Court with a number of different colleagues that I was lucky to work on a team with, and that was a death penalty case out of Oklahoma, and we really had lost hope. And just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court sent that case back to the federal courts for review. So, you know, miracles still do happen, but it is so rare that now it does feel miraculous when you get a favorable ruling either from the Fifth Circuit or the Supreme Court.
Merrill, what about you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Pat?
I was pointing out that it seems as if the Supreme Court has stepped back from review, even to the acknowledged small extent they did, and that the Fifth Circuit, which has never been an easy place in fairness, as Professor Babcock pointed out, has even gotten more deference under the ADEPA standard in the last few years, such that review, that was a good word, Professor, miraculous. It seems miraculous to get review at all. And even that's not a good thing, because the review may be overturning what you thought was a good point.
Well, I was actually kind of surprised in recent years. I mean, I don't do cases at Supreme Court myself, but I was surprised about several rulings by Supreme Court in recent years about the right to a spiritual advisor and the right to be touched by a spiritual advisor during execution that the Supreme Court took up. I think they recently took a case about whether DNA testing can make a difference in punishment phase if you have a right to test it. They made a ruling, Terrence Andrews case, the Bobby Moore case, that's longer ago. So yeah, I agree with Sandra. It's a miracle if they do take it and they give a favorable ruling, but some rulings are very unexpected. And then I guess that's a good thing when they do make them. But to be honest, when John Ramirez's case was at the Supreme Court, I did not expect that ruling from the Supreme Court to come out that way, which I guess it was a good thing because he was saved at that point. but yeah, so it's really hard, I guess, harder after that to kind of determine what they will take on, what they won't take on, and then how they will rule. It's like there's like no pattern except for the religious cases that have a religious touch to it.
Thank you.
There have been some changes, of course, in Texas that are, you were talking about the spiritual advisor being able to touch someone during an execution. There's also little petty changes, like the old thing, it's not like the movies. If people think it's like the movies where you get your last meal and
That was Senator Whitmire who got rid of that.
It's not there. It's gone. It's not a part of the process. I know that recently I was in an elevator with somebody and said, yes, well, Texas has an execution tonight. And they said, Texas doesn't execute people. So the misinformation that's going out about capital punishment, about execution, that's part of the reason why we do this particular show. That's why we do Execution Watch. And we're coming to an end. I'd like to just know if you have any last thoughts for us. Professor Bullitt, Babcock, do you have anything for us?
No, I just want to thank you for doing the show and having me on, and it was a pleasure to meet all the guests.
We are happy to see you via Zoom and glad you didn't have to come back. Meryl, anything to say? Anything to finish?
I just wanted to end with a message from Clinton. He usually has a pretty good last message when he's on the show, but since he's now in prison, he sent it to me, asked me to read it.
Please.
He said, last week, I contemplated a lot of good memories on death row, from Shoot Wells to the Loki and Zilla show. This week, I thought about all the setbacks and losses that we had to endure as a collective. The death penalty is outdated and an immoral form of punishment. Therefore, all executions are wrong.
Thank you very much. And anything in the last
Nothing that would
words?
top what Clinton said.
Yeah, can't. Clinton, you get the last word again. Well, thanks everyone. That brings to a close this edition of Execution Watch. Our next scheduled broadcast date is Thursday, March 13th, 2025, as Texas prepares to send David Wood into the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. Execution Watch will cover the state-sanctioned killing beginning at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time with our live news coverage. We welcome your opinions and on social media and beyond. Go to executionwatch.org to learn more about the death penalty and executions in the state of Texas. And please subscribe to our mailing list. You can also find us on Facebook. Just search Execution Watch, and past shows on YouTube. Our thanks again to the entire Execution Watch crew, legal analysts Meryl Pontier and Pat McCann, reporters Linda Snyder, video director Mark Pirtle, technical director Otis McClay, engineer Howard Reynolds, board op Blue Villatoro, Mel Peterson, our production assistant, traffic, Arlene Russell, Elise Bench, and executive producer Elizabeth Ann Stein. If you're listening live on 90.1 FM, stay tuned for People of Earth. This has been a special edition of Execution Watch. I'm Marlo Blue. Good night.
State of Texas, leave Willie alone. The government killed our most. Got a problem, death row. Ever wonder where money goes? People of Texas, don't you know? Some accused are innocent. Some get good lawyers, most don't. State of Texas, killing machine. Don't you know they're killing people? 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 They're not giving up. It's insane. In Jesus' name. Where's all that religious passion? State of Texas, make a fist. State of Texas, hypocrite. Don't you know they're killing?